Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to welcome you to the sixth panel in our series called Civil Society Sharing Screen. These panels, supported by the European Union, aim to create a discussion environment regarding the developments in the field of civil society with the contribution of civil society professionals, members of academia, experts, human rights activists, and you. I'd like to remind you that you can have access to the recordings of the previous panels on our foundation's website and social media accounts. You could also find further information regarding the upcoming events. Please follow us on our social media accounts and the website. We would like to start out by asking a question. Please feel free to share your answers in the chat box. Actually, the question is as follows. When you think of philanthropy, what comes to your mind? What crosses your mind when you think of the word philanthropy? Today's panel is titled Sustainable Civil Society, Resource Distribution, Philanthropy, and the Donor Behaviors. The ways in which the civil society is supported in Turkey and the world is changing. In what way is it changing? How is it impacted during the pandemic period? What is its impact on individual donations? Today's panel will be moderated by Sevda Kılıçalp from European Foundation Center. Our guest speakers are Rana Kotan, General Secretary of TÜSEV Turkey Third Sector Foundation, and we have Mr. Benjamin Belici from WINGS, Worldwide Initiatives for Grant Maker Support. And we have Özen Polat from Sabancı Foundation Programs Director. Now I'd like to hand the microphone over to Sevda Kılıçalp to moderate this panel. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our panel where we will be discussing about philanthropy, sustainable civil society, resource distribution, philanthropy, and donor behaviors. We'll be together until 8:30. We have three speakers, Rana Hanım from TÜSEV, we have Özen Hanım from Sabancı Foundation, and we have Benjamin Belici from WINGS, Worldwide Initiatives for Grant Maker Support. We will listen to our speakers and we will have a 30-minute question and answer session. As you're aware, financial resources and their availability significantly impact the work of the civil society. The resource issue is not a new one. It has been there for so long time, but today, the way civil society has access to funding, the strategies they deploy have started to change. Today, we will talk about financial sustainability of the civil society sector. We will talk about individual donations, grant programs of foundations, funding strategies of companies and corporations, and how these behaviors are changing will be discussed today. We will also talk about digitalization, enabling legal environment. We will discuss those too. Without further ado, let's go ahead and start with Rana, our first speaker. Rana, we would like to turn to you. In recent years, what changes have you observed in the way in which civil society is supported in Turkey, in the world? Which organizations and fields get the most support? Which ones have the biggest difficulty in having access to funding, in your opinion? I'd like to ask another question. What new support methods are available right now? This is also linked with the pandemic. Are there other factors rather than the pandemic that triggered these changes in the field of civil society? It's over to you. Sevda, thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. We talk about supporting the civil society. There are different ways in which we can support the civil society. There are national, international grants, funds, individual donations, or national public funds, or corporate cooperation funds. There are different ways. What has been changing? Let me talk about what hasn't changed. What hasn't changed is the public funds. That remains unchanged for quite some time. Civil society is supposed to work with the public sector to come up with the solution. However, in Turkey, public sector doesn't truly consider the civil society as a stakeholder or as an actor in the solution. So this hasn't been happening. It is happening in some countries. Well, we do have grants, national or international grants available. And donors who provide grants may set the agenda, have a say, or give a shape to the developments. As far as I remember, Alliance organized a webinar in 2014. They invited speakers, including me. I was one of the speakers. And we talked about grants. Now, there was a metaphor that was used in that session. The grants were said to be resembling to acupuncture, like small needles. So they create such an impact in terms of where you insert the needle, acupuncture. In Turkey, mostly the health sector, education sector, or social assistance sector receive such resources. Or rights-based activities don't receive so much support so far. How about outside of Turkey? Prevention of racism and climate change. These two areas get, I believe, the biggest support. There are some national commitments, agreements that were signed as of July 1st. Under the leadership of WINGS, a global initiative was launched in philanthropy for climate. Is the initiative? I think this is a very important development. So this concerns the corporations, big groups of people. They're going to be trained about climate change. They hopefully will modify their operations. So they commit themselves in this. We expected to have higher level of participation in Turkey. And together with Daphne, we're discussing some ways in which we can increase the level of participation in Turkey. So this concerns climate as a cross-sectional topic. This is the agenda. In Turkey, we can discuss about turning this into a more organized way of doing it. You know, there are wildfires in Turkey, unfortunately. All in all, we don't see a well-organized action so far in Turkey. Apart from that, there are some other models, for example, participatory donation. I mean, the beneficiaries decide, play a decisive role. But this is not common in Turkey. Or we can talk about impact investing. This is also common in some other countries, not so much in Turkey. And there are younger philanthropist groups. I find this group very exciting. We can talk about technology entrepreneurs. This is the new generation. And these people are looking for ways to mobilize people to create funds and resources to convince the philanthropists to make more donations. There are different examples across the world, and this is very exciting. They're trying to create concrete impact. And they are trying to facilitate this donation experience. We could work on that too in Turkey. And this is starting to become widespread. I'm talking about the younger philanthropists and technology entrepreneurs. Another observation I'd like to share with you has to do with the EU or other donors attach great importance to the narrowing space in Turkey. They want to support monitoring, capacity building in the civil society. It's also about financing of terrorism. And one other topic, impact of technology on civil society, digital rights, how they impact the human rights. So foreign donors or external donors attach importance to these areas. How about public funds? They're very insufficient. So in Turkey, foreign grants constitute the biggest share so far. By the way, there is a negative discourse that is common in Turkey. I don't want to go into further details, but if we have time at the end, we can talk about that later, not now. Well, Yurick Kurtaran, I hope his ears are ringing because there is this topic he raises on every occasion. I want to talk about that now. Of course, international funds are very important, but the risk is they may not be sustainable. Of course, it's great to receive an international fund or grant, but will it be sustainable? That's what matters. That is why it is more important to mobilize local level or smaller scale grants or funds. I truly agree with this view. There are some organizations, for example, the Teachers Network, who can do this. They can mobilize in-kind support for the civil society. I believe there will be more examples of this in the future. I could also talk about individual donation and corporate cooperation, but maybe I should do that later. Yes, thank you very much for your comprehensive analysis. You have covered many topics in your intervention. I want to turn to our next speaker, Özan Polat. How about you? What is your take on the recent changes? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Özan from Sabancı Foundation. I would like to pick up from where my colleague left off. For the past 47 years, our foundation has been active in Turkey in order to ensure a world where individuals enjoy equal rights. We're trying to manage change, and we truly see different significant changes recently. In the past, so far we have supported 183 projects, and in our 10th year, we made a reassessment of the current topics in Turkey. We narrowed the field and we focused on access to education, rights-based education. So we narrowed our field down to those areas. Women, youngsters, and handicapped individuals are at our focus. And I believe donors are capable of setting the trends. How? If they give a grant, let's say regarding early marriages, prevention of early marriages, if that happens, you end up getting more applications in that field. So that creates an awareness. That is how the donors may set the trend in a certain area. But the pandemic impacted everything. The health sector, natural disasters, or the refugee issue. Most funds are made available in these areas. And we're trying to be careful about that, especially regarding the refugees. Some NGOs working for women and handicapped people started to have difficulty because of that, because most funds were channeled toward refugees. So there has to be a balance. So every 10 years, we sit down, we make a reassessment in terms of where we channel the funds or donations. As Rana said today, climate change so far hasn't been a top priority. But we thought education projects must be one of the top priorities for us. We don't make huge changes in our themes, but we adapt them. I'd like to share some other observations. In terms of Sabancı Foundation's operation, we work closely with stakeholders. It's not that we just give the money away and we turn our back. No, we follow it up very closely, and we reap the benefits of this close cooperation during the pandemic. The pandemic was almost halting the projects, but we didn't let that happen. We sat down together. We followed it up together. The point I'm trying to make is such institutions, organizations as us, shouldn't just suffice by making the fund available to the actors. We should go the extra mile and follow it up as much as possible. If needed, we provide extra support mechanisms. For the past few years, that's what we do. For example, we assign mentors if the actors need mentoring, because sustainability is important. We want the stakeholders to know what national, international funds are available. Depending on their needs, we provide training sessions, and we also provide extra support in terms of technology, especially during the pandemic. This has become very important. We have a program called quote unquote Change Makers program. And in the 10th year of the program, we revised the content based on the needs. And now it has an extra module based on communication, support on communication. We provide capacity building training sessions, strategy setting, self-expression. So now the program is enriched. It's not just the fund being transferred, it's something much beyond that. And as I said earlier on, we follow the current developments very closely. We need to answer those needs. We need to meet those needs. And you need to pay attention to the cross sections, the overlapping areas. Benjamin, I'd like to turn to you. What is your take on the practices in Turkey? How do you compare that with the world experiences? How do you see the changes taking place in terms of supporting the civil society?
Thank you. And that's very, very interesting for me also to listen to Rana and Ozan to learn from what's the reality right now in Turkey. Just quickly, so that you know who I am, because I'm calling from Brazil actually, so based in a very different context, but I'm sure there are a number of similarities. And at Wings we work globally, so we are looking at the development of the philanthropy field in all its forms. So I think it was reminded at the beginning that we're not just talking about a certain type of philanthropy, like corporate philanthropy, for instance, but really all forms of private resources for the common good. So including individual donations, including community philanthropy, but of course also corporate philanthropy, independent foundations, and so on and so forth. And so at Wings, what we're trying to do is to provide a platform globally for different actors who are trying to support the development of philanthropy. And of course, as a means to supporting civil society and social change, but our focus is really on this resourcing and philanthropy side. And we bring together members such as TUSEF, such as the foundation that supports civil society also in Turkey, and other similar networks and associations, and what we call infrastructure organizations that help philanthropy to thrive in different contexts. And so we have 180 members across the globe, and we're trying to learn with them, like what do they see on the ground, what are the big issues they're trying to tackle to improve the sector. And so we're learning, and from what we've seen recently, there are, of course, a great number of trends in philanthropy. And if I start with institutional philanthropy, let's say foundations, well, I think a first interesting trend that we see, it actually is the trend that detects, all the other trends. It's the question of how do we move from band-aids to really systemic solutions and greater impact. I think that the point about acupuncture was interesting. I think it's moving from band-aids to acupuncture. I think that's what the field is trying to do globally, and of course in many different ways because there are different influences and different tools. But one of the ways is, I think, through collaborative philanthropy. And the COVID crisis has accelerated the trend of more collaboration between philanthropic actors and between foundations to address sometimes bigger issues or things they would not maybe work on if they were alone, but thinking that they can have a bigger impact, a more systemic impact if they collaborate with others that have other assets and bring them together around the table and learn from each other in the process. So we see that trend. That's an interesting one. And I think COVID has accelerated that because it's so overwhelming that foundations across the globe said, well, we need to come together and see what we can do that will really help. I think that there's also a diversification of the tools and approaches that are being used. And it's also, I think Rana referred also to that in what Ozen was describing. It's not just about grant making or operations anymore, because that the two traditional ways for funds to do the work is either to implement their own programs, educate and whatever is their cause, or to provide grants to civil society organizations. But I think now that's going much beyond that. A lot of foundations and philanthropic actors are also now trying to leverage their assets, their financial assets, their investments. So the whole impact investing field. They're also sometimes providing loans to nonprofits, and they're trying to leverage their expertise, their networks. Sometimes, if they're, for example, a corporate foundation, they may have an interesting expertise that they can share with their partners. So I think that we're seeing that diversification, and that's interesting, especially when we're looking at this question of the financial assets. Because if you look globally at philanthropy, institutional philanthropy and foundations, the Harvard report from 2018 says that there are, I think, about 300,000 foundations, and they around the world, and that they distribute $150 billion a year worldwide. That's the estimate that we have. But their assets, their combined assets, represent $1.5 trillion. And those assets, what do we do with them, and how can we leverage them to also create change? I think is really becoming a major issue, and a number of philanthropic actors are trying to figure out how to build the ecosystem and the pipeline that will enable more capital to flow to social change, in addition to grants and other ways of working that philanthropy has been using for a while. But of course, that's linked with this, also connected to another trend, which is the increasing influence of the corporate sector in the social field, for the best and for the worst. So I think for the best, I've described it a little bit now, and there are a number of tools that can be leveraged, and there are models that can actually really help to address some of the social needs very effectively in a more sustainable way, trying to leverage social businesses and other approaches. But of course, there are also a number of critical issues that cannot be addressed by business models that require other forms of support, and especially human rights issues, as it was highlighted. And so the question is, how do we make sure that those issues are not left aside and forgotten? And our point of view at Wings is that we really need a variety of philanthropic players and philanthropic approaches in one context to be able to respond to the different types of needs of society. Because we need also the very simple kind of charity support and kind of band-aid it's needed, but we also need those who are going to innovate and incubate innovation. We also need those who will support human rights and social movements. And so all of these require different forms of philanthropy and a thriving ecosystem. So that's what we're learning. Then I wanted also to reflect quickly on on this question of grant making. And I think there's a major trust issue that we see around the world between philanthropic actors, foundations, and civil society organizations. And that can be addressed. I mean, it's not just cultural or a question of mindset, or I think there are things that can be done to build that trust and allow more capital to be handed to civil society organizations. And that is first helping to create intermediary funds. I think that's a good solution that, those organizations that are able to manage funds in a transparent way, in an effective way, etc., but also that will redistribute that and support the grassroots organizations and grassroots movements. So we need that kind of translation between those who have maybe bigger resources and the smaller local organizations who may not have the capacity to deal with big grants and so on. So we need this sort of intermediary infrastructure. Community philanthropy is something that I think is really important for the future. But trust is also about norms, and we also need, although I'm not necessarily supportive of certification programs because they also have their cons, but it's important that we build also references on how to run effectively a nonprofit and how we can create that trust with potential donors. And finally, it takes platforms for them to talk to each other, because in many places around the world, we see that the philanthropic sector just does not talk to civil society, the local philanthropy. And then, as it was highlighted, most of sort of human rights, civil society, or those engaged in systemic change, they're more dependent on external sources of funding. And less supported locally, and that makes them more vulnerable and less impactful. So there are big questions here, and maybe I didn't check the time, but that brings me to a last point around the areas that are being supported or not. Actually, I think that around the world, education is the number one. It's also the most consensual one, but of course, it's very needed. But even climate change actually is very underfunded. It's not just in Turkey. I think it's less than 2% of philanthropic funding is going to climate, and we know that everything else depends on it. So there is a question of allocation of philanthropic resources, and are they really going where the most pressing needs of humanity are? Probably not. And so we need to work on that. And so it was Rana referred to the climate commitment that we've launched, and some networks have launched also at the national level. So that's very important. I think we need to raise the awareness of the philanthropic sector on some of the big issues that will affect everything else. And I think climate is one of them, of course, but also technology is another one. And I would say structural inequality is a third one that has ramifications and massive impact everywhere in the world, and that I think the philanthropy field should embrace much more actively and intentionally. So I also wanted to say a word about individual giving and all these forms, but we can keep it for later. But just not to forget that actually most of philanthropy is not institutional philanthropy. It's middle class. It's you and me giving to NGOs. That's the bulk of resources for civil society around the world. And so there's a great question about how do we grow that? How do we harness it also to contribute to systemic change? A lot of innovation around individual giving is happening around the world, actually also using technology, but also working through mutual aid and new ways to deliver support to social causes. But I think there is a question on how do we harness all this energy so that it contributes to sort of deeper change. So yeah, these are just a few initial thoughts.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. This has been a valuable contribution, and you also raised key questions for us to address. I can see Ms. Canan Arın raising her hand. We will be receiving questions at the end of the session, but if you are raising your hand to clarify a certain point, please take the floor. Thank you very much. First, I am fully vaccinated. I got my second BioNTech jab. That's why I have some chills. That's why I want to immediately take the floor right now. From the perspective of Turkey, previously, the donations would only be made by government or governmental agencies, and they would only donate to those civil society organizations as they please. That's why we have always requested EU institutions to work on this particular problem. And then there is another issue, which is about the confiscation of properties of foundations. Canan Hanım, if you have a specific question, please let us know. Here is my question. When it comes to the donations made from abroad, particularly from the US, would only be used for the purposes of honor crimes or honor killings? Canan, could you please select the Chinese language as your interpretation channel? Could you please select Chinese language for your interpretation channel? Thank you very much. International donors, they often tend to make grants for topics or causes that are important for them. For instance, the US used to only support projects in honor killings, which is very nice of them. But of course, we cannot really address honor killings overnight. We cannot really solve this problem overnight. Of course, with due respect to all these donors, we are very grateful to them. But how can we ensure the sustainability? Thank you very much. We are noting this question and we will be responding to your question. If you cannot be with us till the end of this panel, you can always watch the recordings of this panel from the Hrant Dink Foundation's YouTube channel. We have covered quite a lot of ground up until now, so I would like to offer you a recap. We have discussed about emerging investment models. This includes social impact investing. More and more foundations are now using this method, as Rana mentioned. We also discussed about climate change, technology, digitalization as new areas that are being supported. But Benjamin warned us that there's still room for improvement over there. Grant-making organizations or donors or foundations, they do not support these areas to the extent that is needed. And of course, it is quite important to support climate change. But when it comes to women organizations or organizations working with girls, they cannot always get the funds that they need. They may be underfunded. Another area where we need resources is efforts for anti-racism. We have also discussed about the most recent studies and activities about ensuring sustainability of this funding. We discussed about the shrinking civic space in Turkey and how this is being supported, digital rights, and its linkage to human rights. This is the area that is now being supported. But one particular issue Rana highlighted was the importance of mobilizing local or domestic funds. It is quite important to have an access to international funds, but what really matters is to mobilize local or domestic funds too. Sabancı Foundation, as a grant-making organization, used to offer support for broader topics, but now they have narrowed down their areas of support. They are mostly supporting education and training, but now they are using some other tools. This was also highlighted by Benjamin. If we want to have a sustainable impact, then we need to ensure that they have their capacities, they have access to certain networks so that they are able to benefit as grassroots organizations from these funds and they are able to effectively use them. Another trend is foundations or grant-making organizations focusing on the grander scheme of things and their interrelations. And Benjamin mentioned that the COVID-19 pandemic accelerated this process. Last but not least, there are 300,000 foundations or grant-making organizations all around the world. But how can we reap the benefits of these funds in the most effective manner? How can we make sure that civil society organizations are institutionalized and their capacities are built? And how can we build trust and confidence among donors and civil society? So this was the recap for the first question. And let me proceed with the second question. I would like to talk more about the individual donations, individual giving, and we have seen changes in our habits of individual giving. For the first time, individuals started to offer funds to CSOs or offered other forms of support or changed their previous ways of supporting civil society. This also holds true for international donors. So I would like to start with Ozan. How did the pandemic impact the culture of giving so far? Do you think these will be some transitional impacts, or are we talking about impacts that will be lasting? And as the very last question, what are the new challenges or opportunities for civil society organizations in accessing individual donations? I believe TÜSEV has a lot to say on this very topic. That's why I want to keep it as brief as possible. Yes, it is fair to say that along with the pandemic, everything has become more visible. I mean, we used to organize events with 200 to 300 attendees, but now we have so many participants attending our events because we have become more accessible. I have also talked about the visibility of healthcare professionals or those working in the healthcare sector. And we have been witnessing how their visibility has increased over the time. That's why investing in healthcare has become one of the top priorities. And this is not only the case for individual donors, but it is also the case for institutional or corporate donors. Of course, we need to also discuss about the role of the private sector here, but we can see that they are more rapidly channeling their support to disasters. I have talked about our Changemaker program, and every year we issue open call. We are looking for the change makers in Turkey. And every year we receive a great number of applications. But during the pandemic, we were worried. We did not know if we would get applications, but we in fact received 4,000 record high applications. So we received 4,000 applications, and I believe this is because everyone now wants to do something for the public good, for the social good, to do something for the healthcare sector, to spread some innovative technological solutions that they have started at their homes. So I believe the pandemic itself deeply impacted individual giving, but also individual volunteering and giving back to the society. And with the most recent disasters, we observe that this will be lasting one. We can see the example in the wildfires most recently.
Benjamin, let's turn to you.
Sure, yes. So that gives me an opportunity to elaborate a little bit on what I was starting to mention earlier. So I think it's a great question. It's a very interesting and positive trend indeed that we're seeing of a surge, I would say, in individual giving around the world in the context of this major COVID crisis. And actually, that has also been even more visible, I think, in countries where there was not such a strong habit or culture to give to civil society organizations, such as Brazil or China or India, and I hear also Turkey. So that's quite encouraging, and we've seen unprecedented levels of giving in I think most regions. Even from what I know in places like France, I know that I'm French, so I follow a little bit what's going on in France, and I know that they had record numbers also of individual donations there in 2020. So it's a really global trend, and of course that's encouraging and very positive. I was saying that with some of the things that were new were that actually a lot of citizens and people have leveraged technology to organize themselves without the intermediation of a civil society organization, and directly trying to respond to a need, identifying a need in the neighborhood or somewhere, and then with social media or with online platforms trying to see who could help with what, who has the skills, who has the materials, and a lot of punctual interventions like that. And that is interesting because that has proved to be extremely effective and fast and agile. But then it's also not very, so it doesn't last. Like once something has been done, then it dissolves and these groups disappear. So I think it's worth watching and understanding how this is going to evolve, because I think that's probably a trend. And we've seen a lot of that in places like China, where technology is already playing a very important role in individual giving. But yeah, I think we're seeing innovation everywhere, even in Brazil here, again, through technology. We see different initiatives to help people to give more. For example, just as Ribbon, one of our members in Brazil, they're developing a technology so that for any sort of local business or supermarket or any store can have a little software that allows anyone who makes a purchase in that store to also give a certain percentage of their purchase to civil society organizations. And that's just an example of many new ideas and initiatives to grow more individual giving. And I think technology is a great ally there. But as always, it comes with some risks or some concerns or that we need to pay attention to. And one of them is that individual giving online is growing a lot. And that so helps with the idea that it will bring more resources for change, which is great. But sometimes it was mentioned it's going directly without intermediaries, without civil society organizations. And so on the one hand, that means that maybe some of the causes that are not maybe the most important ones objectively, if that can be objective, are not going to be supported, while other causes that will be more spectacular or generate emotion through social media around circles of people, then that will get all the resources. And so there's a risk also of scattering the sort of the support to social change into many punctual emotional efforts that will do good but not necessarily transform the situation. So that's something to be aware of. And also on the other side, some of the online giving platforms and portals help channel some of these new resources to NGOs and organizations that are well structured. But then the risk here is that we have sort of new gatekeepers or like new portals that will increase the concentration of civil society or increase the comparative advantage, if we can say, from the more equipped and bigger and more professional NGOs that are able to be recognized on some of these online giving platforms will receive the funds, while the other ones, the local ones, the smaller ones, might not be able to organize themselves to be eligible and present on some of these big giving platforms, and then they'll starve. So, I mean, that's something that is moving fast with lots of potential. And I think we need to build on that. And I think there's something to be done about building generous societies. And that is going beyond just like having more money or more people to give, but how can we stimulate all society at all levels to give more, to contribute more to social change, like individuals, corporations, and really build like different types of societies. So I think I'm quite optimistic in that sense, because I can see some really interesting movements and changes. And I'll just conclude with maybe one thought about this idea of local giving and why that's important. I think that's absolutely critical. Of course, at Wings we're promoting, and we can maybe talk about that later today, but we're of course supporting in like cross-border giving, and we want donors, people to be able to give and express their solidarity abroad. We believe it's even a human right to be able to to express solidarity across borders. So we very much defend that, and we're actually advocating for that globally, with the support of the European Union, by the way. But I think that this question of how do you grow local philanthropy locally is really critical for many different reasons. One is the resilience and the fact that we said that it's very easy for a government to cut foreign funding to civil society. And then if your whole civil society is depending on a handful of external donors, it's extremely easy to starve them. So I think there's a question of like growing local resources for civil society as a way to make civil society more resilient, I think is critical. But also very often local funders have a better understanding of local reality. And so they have, I think, more chances to create a positive impact for that reason. And so all of this requires investment. Philanthropy grows alone, but if we make strategic and targeted investments in building the infrastructure or the ecosystem for giving and for philanthropy, then we can really accelerate that. And I think that's very much needed. I don't know if some of you were there, but in 2016, I was in Istanbul, and there was the first World Humanitarian Summit in Istanbul. And that's where there was what they called the grand bargain, and that all the big international donors said, we need to have more money going to local organizations and more agency to local organizations to implement development. And the objective was to move from 2% of international giving, of giving going to local organizations to 20%. And we're still around 2% 5 or 6 years later. So we really need to accelerate that movement, build the local capacity, build the local infrastructure, the local philanthropy to make that a reality. And at Wings, we're actually developing some tools to help with that. So I'll be happy to say a word later if we have more time. But that's, I think, a really important issue.
This was wonderful. If we have extra time, we will definitely turn back to that issue in terms of local funding, local support. How can we create generous societies? Yes, if we have time left, we will come back to this issue. Or even better, we can organize a totally separate panel on that. Well, let's turn to Rana. It is your turn. I know you have important work that you have carried out in this area. What is your take on this? Well, during the pandemic, there has been an increase in the individual donations, but in the past year and a half, Turkey had lots of disasters, wildfires, earthquakes. Benjamin may or may not be aware of these in Turkey, but these disasters also impacted the trend. So nowadays, among the society, this feeling of emergency triggers feelings or local donations or solidarity. I agree with Benjamin regarding the recent wildfires. Local groups got together using WhatsApp, social media, took quick action. They were very agile and they mobilized resources and they acted together. They transferred in-kind support to local people. Well, in terms of organizational structure, this also created some problems because not all the time these efforts were well planned, programmed, but in the past year and a half, I believe individual donations have increased partly due to the pandemic and due to those disasters. But mostly these efforts are not sustainable. They don't last. They just respond to an urgent need. And once the disaster is over, that is over. Well, on behalf of TUSEV, we focus on 2 points. One, increase the amount of individual donations to civil society. Two, ensure that they're lasting, they're sustainable. These are the 2 important things for us. What could be done about this? We have 2 activities. Support and change is the first action we took, and the other one has to do with sharing. These are the 2 projects, or let's say 2 actions we took regarding achieving these goals. We're trying to create such a culture to act together, take action together. By the way, every 3 years, we launch a research regarding the situation of individual donations in Turkey. Well, in Turkey, philanthropy is very widespread, and this remains unchanged. But compared to Turkey, we have more informal practices in Turkey. What this means is individuals don't go through a civil society organizations, but they just go to the target people themselves, not through a civil society organization. This differentiates Turkey from most other countries. There is such a trend. We also looked at the impact of the recent disasters and pandemic. By the way, the most recent research will be published in the coming months. Let's think of daily wage earning cleaning ladies. Some individuals, although they stopped receiving service from these ladies, they still continued to pay for them. But by the way, we have another important publication that gives us a striking finding. This is about Global Giving Report. There is a record that is broken actually in the number of individuals who gave donation to people that they have not met, that they don't know. This is very valuable. Well, there are solidarity networks that emerged thanks to the pandemic, and I totally agree with Benjamin because these local groups are so agile. They act fast, they respond to the needs quickly in the right way, and they are truly agents of change. There are neighborhood level solidarity groups that react in case of fires or disasters, deep poverty network or other solidarity networks or utility bill paying networks or needs map. Well, all these activities contributed a lot. One other example is Pay It Forward. Well, quite recently, we carried out another research to better analyze the donations and civil society. We try to understand the perception of civil society regarding active citizenship. I would like to share with you some of the findings. Let me start. Between the individuals and the civil society, there is quite some distance, apparently. For example, one may have a concern about the social life, but doesn't know whom to talk to, where to go. So this is a hindrance regarding sustainability. How can we bring individuals closer to the civil society? How can we increase the amount of donations? We need to actually demolish the barriers. We need to find a way to bring those people together, people who would like to work regarding the same topic. Another point is the communication should be based on a common purpose, not just about mobilizing donations. So in the first place, NGOs should have a clear purpose. And it is also important to note how the society perceives the purpose of the civil society organizations. I think this has to do with communication. Well, another point that comes out is people don't want to hear more promises. For example, give me this donation and I will give scholarship to so many students. Well, these are not visible results. Individuals would like to see the concrete results and would like to celebrate the successful results. That is one other finding. I should also talk about expectations of donors. Donors should understand that they cannot save the world by just making one simple donation. So this is about managing the expectations. I think these are some very important findings that came out of that research. Of course, there's more to it, but we don't have much time. We consider organizing separate sessions where we could maybe later on discuss about those findings. But so far, that's it. Thank you very much, Rana. We're looking forward to reading the results, the findings of that research. Well, we will now make a wrap up about the answers given to these questions. Well, there is a significant increase in the amount of individual donations, increase in the sense of solidarity, feeling of solidarity. Now people do more for people that they haven't even met once. Individuals are more mobilized in very creative, innovative ways. And we should work harder to make these efforts lasting. And we expect these to impact the methods, the support mechanisms regarding civil society. There is a positive trend, and technology is giving us an enabling environment. Benjamin drew our attention to an important point, which is about some technology platforms that are used for collection of donations. This is an enabling factor, but we should be aware of some risks. because there is this risk of over concentration of donations into certain areas or certain organizations. So we should be aware of that. We also talked about cross-border donations, or also about local donations. Local donations are so important for resilience. And Rana made a very important point, saying local donors know more about local conditions. They may respond better in terms of local disasters or emergency situations. Although those good, willing, well-meaning efforts may not sometimes be well planned or well programmed, and this may also create some organizational problems. Rana talked about some works conducted by TUSEV in terms of how we can create generous societies, how to increase the amount of donations. They organize events, they launch programs, they have research, and they make some comparisons. They have important findings based on their research studies. So the World Giving Index tells us that there's a growing number of donors, individual donors in the world. And this could even be higher. And we need to see what the obstacles are. In that sense, Rana made very important suggestions. Right now, we have a very important group of people listening to us. They represent important civil society organizations. So it is important to note that right now there is a distance between the civil society and individuals. Sometimes individuals forego civil society. They want to directly go to the target audience, target group. So in that sense, civil society should do more regarding communication. What individuals want to hear is not about more promises and more promises. They just want to see more concrete results. It is important to make success stories visible.
Let us proceed with our next question, and let us talk about the corporate world. Yes, the private sector, the corporates, they have been supporting civil society, but I had the impression that they are now more interested in becoming civil society themselves. So let us start with Benjamin. What is your take on the corporates' interest in engaging in civil society activities? Do you think this means more cooperation and resources for civil society, or can it be a factor of shrinking civic space?
Yes, well, I think first that's something that is actually well established already, and in many regions of the world, actually corporate philanthropy is a leading philanthropic force, sometimes the main one. If you take places like Latin America, for example, corporate philanthropy, I think, accounts for more than half of institutional philanthropy. And it's true that they are in majority operational philanthropic actors, so they don't distribute resources to civil society organizations. They implement their own programs. They run hospitals. They run schools, etc., etc. And I think that to my earlier point, I think what matters is that we have enough diversity in the philanthropy field in one context. So I think it's perfectly fine to have corporate foundations implementing programs, leveraging their own expertise and doing it. I think that can sometimes even be very impactful and positive. The problem is when this becomes the majority, and then civil society is left aside, and there is no there is no real trust built, and then the whole sort of social work is being done by private entities that do not represent democratic engagement as civil society organizations do. And so that's where we need to pay attention, that the field is diverse enough and that all forms of philanthropy can be supported correctly in a specific place. So I think that, I mean, it's overall, I think it's positive. Maybe again being optimistic because we need more and more resources to address the huge global challenges we're facing and the sustainable development goals. And we're very, very far away still from what it will take to reach these goals and to transform our societies. So we need all resources that are available to flow to social causes. But I think it's critical that we build bridges between corporate actors and civil society actors, that they learn to talk to each other, that they build trust between each other, that more grant making is happening, and that grant making is growing. And I think that's a slow, but it's a slow trend, but it's a trend in places like Latin America. I think that even those corporations that they're starting to consider doing a bit more grant making than they were. So hopefully that's something that will evolve. But it's true that there is a risk of like two worlds operating in parallel dimensions and not talking to each other. So I think it's really important that we build more bridges. But business can be an ally, including for civil society. We've seen it, and it's been I think documented by different actors. I remember that Charities Aid Foundation had produced an interesting report a few years ago about case studies of when business actors have promoted and supported and defended civil society actors against the shrinking space, because that was seen as part of their interest also as corporations to do so. So it's not incompatible, but it's true that it brings a number of issues that need to be addressed around, especially around, I would say, around trust. And also about maybe a certain maybe tendency sometimes from corporate actors or even from individual donors coming from the corporate sector to that have been very successful in business, and then that maybe that impression that the same methods will apply to the social sector and bring the same results and the same success. And I think we know it's not the case, and that social change is much more complex than business. And so that that takes, I guess, a mindset also for corporate actors to maybe consider other approaches, embrace complexity, and accept not to have everything under control, because social change oftentimes does not happen exactly where we were expecting it to happen, but it happens because we trusted the right leaders, the right partners, and supported change on the long term. So anyway, I think that's a very big issue, a very broad field, and we need to build bridges and to make sure to harness this new capital and this new energy for true change.
Thank you very much indeed, Benjamin. This has been a rather difficult paradox that we need to overcome. What about you, Rana? How do you see this happening in Turkey? Yes, there is a growing corporate interest in civic space in Turkey. Yes, of course, some of the resources are not really being utilized effectively, so they're being wasted. But I think we should also focus on the good practices or good examples. But I also had a feeling that this is also not always very sincere of those corporates. I mean, some of them, they want to appear in the public eye that they are doing something for the social good. But of course, the companies, they also need to work towards topics that would be for the benefit of this globe. I mean, they have to, anyway, evolve their activities towards this direction. And I would like to talk about Mazar Denge Company. This is an accounting company, and I can see one of the participants is in fact from this company. This accounting firm, they have changed all their operations and procedures, and they want to create value for all their customers, and they want to have sustainable practices and methods. They set up a sustainability committee, and they drawn and signed protocols. They do not use any product at their offices that is not environmentally friendly. They do not work with customers that do not respect environment. And they organize events about sign language. They offer pro bono services. They help with employment permits or work permits for social causes. And they also support certain marginalized groups or groups that have difficulty in accessing this kind of support, including LGBT plus organizations. Benjamin referred to the importance of trust and confidence and building bridges. And there should also be a notion of equality, but at the same time, there should be a certain distance to keep the balance. Otherwise, this would only be remaining as a corporate social responsibility project. I also have a corporate background myself, and unless we achieve this acquaintance, quote unquote, unless we get to know each other, then things are not really sustainable. Only when we meet with civil society representatives as corporates, then we do understand and start interacting with them. There is also another model of ACEV. This is Mother and Child Training Foundation, and they also use models on ensuring gender equality, for instance. We are also currently working on workers on payroll. This is, in fact, another form of giving. This is called payroll giving scheme. It is not yet available in Turkey. And we believe that this payroll giving scheme can be organized through companies. Of course, it will be great if the government can offer some tax incentives, and we are exploring if this would be possible. We are receiving analytical support from Ernst & Young. So we have also undertaken a brief study on this. So the first finding is that the company should be really doing something good for the society. I mean, so they should be a real role model, a good model, and have this connection or relationship with the civil society organization to build a genuine relationship. And CSOs are concerned that maybe these corporates may have some social pressures or may bring along social pressures on the CSOs. And we believe that there may also be a collective success story at the end of the day. And that's why, as TUSE, we will be working more and more with corporates in order to engage them to support civil society. This is a brilliant study. We are very much looking forward to have the final findings. Let us continue with Özlem. Well, this is one of my favorite subjects because I also wrote my master's dissertation on this topic. Coming back to the question, offering resources, does it mean cooperation? Yes, I believe it means cooperation because nowadays we are faced with such complex problems that we cannot really respond to them by ourselves, and we need to engage ourselves in partnership with others. Both Benjamin and Rana talked about the increased interest of corporates, but from now on, this is something that corporate world will not be able to ignore this. I mean, in the past, we would talk only about sustainability or corporate social responsibility, but now we are talking about corporate citizens. And when we look into the choices of the new generations, both on the consumer side and during the recruitment process, they are preferring this type of companies. And some of the job seekers would even accept some portion of their salaries being deducted for investing in a good cause. So we are now having hierarchical structures or relations, but this is something that we need to work on. As part of my research, I had interviews with civil society organizations. So on one part of the spectrum, some CSOs, they take it very positively. On the other end of the spectrum, they had really bad experiences. That's why they would never like to get engaged with the corporates again. But corporates are not only financial resources or suppliers of financial resources. And this is how CSOs should see them as well. Of course, when they get funds from the corporate world, this is great news. They would be very happy, but this is mostly one-off and not sustainable and not a meaningful cooperation. We also observe a common understanding or perception that only certain CSOs are benefiting from the corporate funding because the companies or the private sector, they are also concerned that by supporting certain NGOs or preferring certain NGOs over others, they do not want to be having any problems in the social perceptions. And we know that corporates are recruiting also CSO workers. Sometimes CSO workers see it only as a pure HR or human resources operation. But if CSOs continue to see this only as a collaboration through funding, this would not be sustainable for the corporates either, because they instead would like to see them as part of their team, as part of their human resources. So they should be able to sit around a table, and to get engaged with one of them, with one another. So with the climate crisis and European Green Deal, we see that it's quite obvious for the corporates to get more engaged with civil society, and civil society should also be more open or conducive to such collaboration, should be able to develop some models for collaboration. So throughout these studies, we are also in touch with companies under Sabancı Holding. So we encourage them to directly work with CSOs instead of working with other third parties or outsiders. But the civil society should also be ready for such a collaboration with the corporate world through some new methods. Well, for instance, let's say there is a special day or New Year's Eve, and some companies would like to market certain products or merchandise. Well, I believe that we cannot keep pace with the corporate world. For instance, in this particular example, that's why civil society also needs to keep up with the corporate world, and they should both be more flexible. CSOs should not see the corporate world only as a financial resource. You may be requesting 50,000 Turkish liras from a company, but in fact, what you are seeking may be technology. So this company may be very good with technology, and they can offer you a technology know-how as well. Very recently, we started a project for women who are victims of violence. And we get their cell phones and we make sure that these cell phones are investigated forensically, are cleaned of any problems, and they are repaired. So for this repair service, we received support from the company Teknosa. So we may think out of the box, and we may bring both parties together. These are all excellent examples and very important observations. I do not want to offer you a wrap-up because we are running out of time. I want to proceed with our next question. Rana, let me turn to you first this time. Digital transformation. We have been discussing this at large. We see as a positive phenomenon, and we always discuss how are we going to adapt to digital transformation. But what will be the impact of digital transformation on CSO's access to funding? What opportunities and threats it would offer?
Especially during the pandemic, digital transformation helped us adapt ourselves to the changing world. That was an important gain. There was a quick transformation into the digital world. Yes, technology enabled donations. There are lots of examples of cooperation between e-commerce websites and civil society organizations. Lots of good cooperation examples. And certain amount of sales allocated for civil society donations. Well, digital world enabled the donations. There are numerous examples of that especially during the pandemic, but one needs to be cautious. Despite the changes in the technology, you can't do much if the legislative changes are not keeping up with it. Right now, we have a very restricted legislative framework. Had it not been the case, things would have been much different in terms of using the digital tools and creating different various funds. This is an obstacle. We're doing advocacy to change it, but it's not an easy to change the matter. On to another point regarding opportunities and threats. I'd like to talk about civil society, if we want civil society and democracy to flourish in the same digital environment, we need to provide an enabling environment. Stanford University organized the technology camp. I was there. It was an eye-opening experience. Let me share with you my impressions. Everyone is talking about machine learning and artificial intelligence and how that's going to impact the civil society. Of course, these are all good things, but not purely good. They involve problems as well. For example, CCTV cameras, bio data being collected by artificial intelligence. Well, there are such applications that may be threatening the human rights. I'd like to give you an extreme example from China, a country that monitors citizens on a continuous basis. They do a social scoring based on the behaviors that they monitor. If you don't obey the traffic lights, if you spit on the sidewalk, somehow that impacts your individual score, and you may end up being deprived of some national services. Or some countries use artificial intelligence to predict the potential of an individual to commit a crime. I think this is very dangerous. An artificial intelligence application deciding on the likelihood of an individual to commit a crime, I find it truly dangerous. Dangerous in terms of discrimination and in other areas. So there are such threats as well. Actually, we would like to reap the benefits of technology in terms of developing the civil society, in terms of enabling access to funds, resources, but that's not always happening in that way. In terms of governments and corporations, I mean, individuals are being supervised, surveyed by governments and corporations. How about privacy? How about the protection of fundamental rights? So we have to be cautious regarding surveillance using artificial intelligence. Some circles who are not pro-government, maybe in some countries, may be subjected to surveillance, and this may be a threat for their rights. And some countries shut the internet down totally, like Belarus, Myanmar, some recent examples. As to the face recognition technology, use of cameras, surveillance is taking place without you being aware of it, without you giving your consent. Who owns the data? Who shares the data with whom? There's no transparency sometimes. And there has to be certain rules about that. In terms of peaceful protests, such surveillance applications are used as a ground to take action against citizens. There are some protests that take place with umbrellas, like in Seattle, in Hong Kong. Wearing a mask doesn't help. You just need to use an umbrella to make sure you're not recognized. So that's a trend. People use umbrellas during some protests. Technology companies use our data. They create patterns to make profit out of our behavior patterns. Today's petroleum is data. That's the most important, valuable asset today, data. Well, I believe all these topics will be discussed more in Turkey in terms of civil society. So digital world has a huge impact on us. The EU is preparing a regulation regarding digital tools, and Turkey is also starting to take action regarding digital tools and social media. Very important points you made, Rana. Benjamin, I would like to turn to you now. You worked with online crowdfunding platforms. Actually, you shared your thoughts about that. Would you like to add anything else?
Yes, well, I think that's a very important topic, and I know Rana expanded a bit the scope of the question, but I think it's important because it's true that the implications of digital transformation on civil society work are critical. I think that overall, in terms of if we take the fundraising angle and question, it's positive. I talked a little bit about some of the aspects that we need to maybe to look at and address. But overall, I think this is going to generate more resources and new ways also to contribute to social change enabled by technology. So I think we've covered that quite broadly. But I would like to insist on something. I think that, and I was glad to hear Ozan earlier saying that as part of their support to their grantees, they're also providing tech support. I recently wrote something for an alliance that I'll put it here in the chat. But so a few months ago, I wrote about this question about how philanthropy needs to step up on tech issues, and one of the key things to be done, I think, is for philanthropy to support their partners and civil society organizations in getting ready and being equipped to deal with these digital disruptions, including for fundraising, but much beyond that. And I think it's also about how to transform the way we do social work and how we can leverage technology to have more impact. But it's also about, from a more of a sort of governance perspective or democracy perspective, how can we help civil society organizations be more informed and better understand the consequences of the digital transformation on their area of work and on civil society more broadly. And I think in this area, we're really lagging behind. And I think we completely underestimate the effects and the impacts of these technological innovations and disruptions on civil society and on democracy. And I really think it's a very important role for philanthropy to help civil society be better equipped to use technology, but also to understand the digital transformation. And there's a lot of important and interesting research around this topic. People like Lucy Bernholz at the Stanford PAX is studying that quite closely, and she's basically saying that civil society does not exist anymore outside digital space, and that she calls it now the digital civil society. And some of the problems she's highlighting is that means that the civic space has been privatized because all our exchanges and discussions and the content and everything that civil society actors are sharing and doing is online, and so belongs in a way to these platforms, these private platforms, and the data, as it was mentioned, belongs to them. And so that holds a huge number of risks for the future. And I think some of the examples Rana highlighted are really important ones. So I think that's a very tricky topic, because we don't want to be like Luddites and saying technology is bad and we need to get away from it. It can do a lot of good, but it's true that it's so powerful that as any power, it needs to be checked. And so it's such a powerful tool that I think we need to really invest a lot of efforts thinking about the consequences for civil society.
Benjamin, thank you very much for your valuable thoughts and for sharing this important link. In the past months, you had a webinar. Maybe some of the participants here may go ahead and check the video recording of that webinar. Ozan, how about you, Ozan? Thank you very much. I'll try to be brief. I would like to talk about the problem regarding accessibility. not everyone has been able to catch up with digital transformation at equal pace. Some of us don't have the technological tools available. Some of us don't have the content available. Some have access problems, especially for disabled people. This is a crucial problem. Every year we organize a philanthropy seminar, and the latest one was about online presence. This has to do with online training. Some girls can't attend school because they don't have a laptop in their houses, for example, or some disabled people don't have technological tools. So we have a long way to go to meet those people's needs. In our Change Makers program and the grant program, as Benjamin said, we did a lot of work to provide the technological tools at basic level. But of course, we know that's not enough. Those people should also know how to use those technological tools. They need training, and that is a part of the support program. I think digital transformation will stay with us. It's not going away, and we have to catch up with it. I am rather positive, not so negative. With the pandemic, there is more visibility thanks to digital transformation. There are many platforms, projects that are more visible, that receive more resources and funding. We have some projects that have been quite lucky. For example, one project we support is conducted by the association that works for people with allergies. They were able to produce video clips for the online world. They used digital tools, and now they have access to a wider audience. And the Association for People with Hearing Problems, they also have a very good example. They have been able to access thousands of families thanks to the digital tools. My point is, the digital transformation has lots of positive sides as well. We have seen very good examples. One last point I'd like to make. The digital tools increased visibility and helped us with the management of resources we use. There are good examples. Volunteerism, visibility, and resource availability, they're all important, but equally important is how you manage all of those. You may have resources, you may have the tools, but maybe you don't have the capacity to manage all those. That is also important. So one needs to be careful in terms of managing the visibility that is significantly increased thanks to the digital transformation. Otherwise, it could be a risk too. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ozan. Well, we don't have much time left. I'd like to turn to the participants and I'd like to get their questions now. You may raise your hands or type your questions in the chat box. Canan Hanım has a question regarding the donors and how can we make their support more sustainable, focused on a single topic. Who would like to answer this question? You may just go ahead, turn on your mic and go ahead. I can start. Not sure if this question was addressed to me. This was rather about international donors. Well, for us, it takes us 10 years to switch from one theme to another theme, but we, of course, try to adapt ourselves to the changing conditions. Well, we do reassessment. through some committees at the beginning of the pandemic. Before we took any action, we sat down and made a reassessment. We checked what some other foundations do. We checked their commitments, and we published our own commitment. And we had some meetings to assess the needs, analyze the needs. And that's what we do. We do consultation on a continuous basis. And we have many training sessions as well. I'd like to take the floor. Regarding the EU, I believe the question was regarding the EU or international donors. Of course, they have some priority areas where they would like to make an impact. And if you already work in that specific field, and if they believe you work in an efficient way, if there is confidence, then your relationship could be a long-lasting one. That is what happens with us. But sometimes that happens in a different way. For example, some international donors think they want to work on freedom of speech, freedom of media, but maybe you don't work in that field. Then what's going to happen? If that's not your field of expertise, don't go ahead. Don't dive into that area just because the international donors want to work in that area. But on the other hand, I also understand civil society needs funds and donations. Some organizations turn to one field just because funds are available in that field. In that case, it's difficult to build a long-lasting relationship. So you need to be careful. And international donors truly set the agenda, but when they're setting the agenda, maybe they should pay attention to having a consultative process, a participatory process. I know it's not easy. It's easier said than done.
Well, I can maybe just add one quick remark, because I think that was already very complete answer from my co-panelists. But I would just insist on the fact that there is a growing understanding of the fact that the biggest impact can be achieved for a foundation, a philanthropic actor. It can be achieved through unrestricted funding and long-term funding for their partners. And that's being more and more documented and by research, by practice. And it's still not a mainstream practice, but we see some important, influential philanthropic actors like the Ford Foundation with their Build program, or even what I don't know if you heard about the Mackenzie Scott, the ex-wife of Jeff Bezos, is investing very, very important resources in that way through unrestricted, long-term, multi-year funding to partners that they identify. And so I think that this really should become almost the norm, and that networks like Wings or like 2SEF, I think we have a role to play in changing the mindset and giving the tools, because as it was said about participatory grant making, it's not always easy to make the shift. You have legal questions, you have a number of questions you need to look into. So I think that there is a real role for us support organizations to help the philanthropic sector think long-term, systemic change, and then that translates into the way they operate through more long-term funding and unrestricted funding.
Yes, we do hope that we will see philanthropy and corporate philanthropy, institutional philanthropy will be a lasting one based on a trust relationship, and it will be thriving. We do receive very positive signals, and we will hopefully see more examples. I can see Onur Sazan. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the Hrant Dink Foundation. You have brought together very competent panelists, and I can see familiar faces, Rana, Benjamin, Özan. It's great to see you all. Rana talked about this at the beginning of her speech. I want to talk about the public funds. We do not really see the public sector as a sincere donor. You may recall the debate around a Mediascope online media platform, even though they transparently disclosed information about their donors. Now there is a very big debate going on. And it seems that this debate is also sparked within the public sector itself, and it will have implications on other CSOs receiving funds from international donors. So I would like to address my question to Rana. How do you foresee what will happen with these developments? And I would like to also ask Özan about some international practices. What happens in other countries, other international foundations? Do you think that they will be shifting their focus to human rights organizations or rights-based organizations? Thank you very much indeed. This was, in fact, a very important question because we wanted to raise this ourselves too. I would like to offer my contribution too. But then perhaps Benjamin can pick up from where I will be living about the international practices. May I start? I think this is a very significant question, what Onur has just raised. There is a growing tendency for more protectionism. And I believe that there are certain practices, shrinking civic space or mounting pressure on rights organizations. I mean, this is a global phenomenon, but we can also see its repercussions on Turkey. And there's also an increasing skepticism, an increased audits or inspection towards international donations, quote unquote, foreign donations. And of course, this debate is not only limited to Mediascope, the online media platform. In fact, this practice of labeling or auditing certain CSOs receiving funds from abroad, this has been the case before. There is an effort to forge a perception that CSOs receiving funds from abroad are not working for a public good or engaged in controversial topics. Well, in fact, this is quite dangerous because a greater number of CSOs are able to continue and sustain their activities thanks to international donors. In July, as to say, we made a public statement about this amid discussions about Mediascope, that there are limited funding resources available in Turkey, and receiving international donation is a widespread practice around the world. We also noted that the government or the public sector always have at its discretion to use any audit mechanism or any reporting mechanism. We have seen a big discussion on the social media about that. but these discussions are not really based on a tangible or truthful information. That's why we felt the need to take action on this. I do not know how this will evolve. I hope we will not be coming any closer to Russia. But I feel that we as TUSEV have the role to have our say on this topic. And here is what I would like to add. Naming it as trend may not be the right thing, but we see very few applications from rights-based organizations. And I had a feeling that we should also change our advocacy methods. Yes, this is already a problem on the part of the public sector, but we should also question ourselves. We are substantially supporting the education and training sector. And of course, human rights is not always a priority. And even while working on education, we go to Ankara, to the capital, to have a number of meetings, but this does not always count as advocacy. So we should really reflect on our advocacy practices and discuss how we can transform it. In recent years, we now have some projects with municipalities. I think we may also discuss this with them, because in the last few years, we do not see incoming applications from advocacy projects, not in the nature or scale we used to see previously. On the other hand, we also see that international donors themselves are hesitant while offering funds in Turkey, perhaps for the same reasons. That's why it is quite important for us to work with international donors. I mean, an international donor who would like to offer funds in Turkey for the first time, they do not have trust. So I think this mistrust issue affects all spheres of this question. Thank you very much, Ozan. Benjamin. We talked about international donors and the public sector's restrictive, let's say, tendencies about limiting those. So we would like to hear your take on these.
Yes, sure. And well, first, I'd like to confirm that this is definitely a documented trend, a policy trend globally. That is not just in so-called emerging economies, or it's really touching both the so-called North and South, and different regions. We see that the tendency is on restrictions rather than opening. There are, of course, some good news, but overall they're not good. And I think the International Center for Nonprofit Law, who is tracking and monitoring these legal restrictions, or this enabling environment around the world, I think that recently they published a number saying that among all the new legislations and regulations for philanthropy around the world over the past few years, I think almost 75% of these regulations were restrictive regulations and not enabling regulations. So that's a real fact. And actually, governments are quite effective at replicating worst practice. And we've seen countries like Nicaragua replicating, almost copy pasting the Russian law, and they're even calling it the Putin law there. And so that's something that we need to be organized against. And we're not, unfortunately. I think that some of the philanthropic sectors, like in some countries, have a bit more structure and a bit more voice to be able to speak with government and try to sort of safeguard those spaces and the enabling environment, including for cross-border giving and being able to receive resources from abroad. But overall, we're not equipped, we're not organized, and we're extremely vulnerable to that. So I think that there are two. Well, first, Wings is trying to do something about that at the global level, because I always say that the philanthropy sector is probably the only one that never collectively organized itself at the global level to promote its own interests and its own ability to operate and to send grants and so on. And it's a huge industry. We were talking about it earlier. It's not, but still we've never invested. So Wings is now with all the members of Wings trying to fill that gap. And we have now a bit of support from the European Union for that. And we also want to help our members nationally and regionally to be more effective at addressing these kind of restrictions and issues. But this is very complex. This is long term. It requires skills that we sometimes don't have. And so that means it requires for foundations themselves, I'm not now talking about networks, but I'm talking about foundations themselves to step up, and not on the front line, because of course it can be very difficult for them as a philanthropic institution to step up and defend or criticize that law or etc. But they should be behind their networks and their umbrella organizations to do this kind of work. And I know that in many places that's not what we've seen happening, because philanthropic actors have been worried, and we understand, of course, that that could have repercussions, and so they remain silent. But the problem is that we're kind of leaving the space, and it sort of keeps closing. So I would say that there are two big strategies here. One is to reinforce this advocacy and the voice of philanthropy and start collectively organizing and having a dialogue on a positive and constructive base with policymakers. That's the first thing. And Wings is trying to develop some tools also based on different experiences to help pick the battles also, because there are some battles that are desperate and you will never get your government to change this or that, but there are other things where you can have an influence. So anyway, I think there is a whole effort to make there. But then the other strategy goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is about really strengthening local resourcing for civil society, and not just for education and sort of consensual issues, but also for human rights and the whole spectrum of the needs. And that is another strategy that is complementary, but I think we need to do both, like advocate to maintain those cross-border flows, but also build in parallel the local ecosystem to have more local resources that are more resilient. And all of this requires one thing: it requires a strong ecosystem, a strong infrastructure for philanthropy. And so there's here, I think, a very, very important role for foundations first, but also for other actors like international cooperation agencies and so on, to really invest, like the EU is doing and others, in this capacity of civil society and philanthropy.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed. We are time is up for this panel, but I would still like to check with each and every panelist to see if they have any final concluding remarks. Özan, Rana, Benjamin, do you have any final remarks? I do not have any other remarks. Thank you very much. Fine by me. I think this was a great panel. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. I also want to thank my co-panelists and Yusefta for the great moderation. And I also want to thank the translators, because they did a wonderful job, and I was feeling like it was an actual English panel. So thank you very much also to our translators.
Yes, I fully agree with you. This was a great panel, and I would like to thank all our panelists for their valuable contribution. We would like to thank all our attendees for their questions, and we would like to thank the Hrant Dink Foundation for hosting us and bringing us together, and our thanks to interpreters. We're very much looking forward to see you in upcoming panels. Good evening.